Once there lived a girl, gleaming with determination, for she had a dream to fulfill, but she was scared to do it. This girl was a monster tracker. Self-proclaimed, that is. The truth is, she didn't actually know whether or not monsters existed. She loved animals, insects, all creatures great and small. In the skies, in the trees, in the rivers and the soil beneath her feet. But in her little neck of the woods, she'd seen everything. She knew where the muntjac gather. She knew which fields the roe deer graze. She knew which branches the owls like to perch and what time of year the partridges arrive. She knew what trees to avoid, unless she wanted 100 crows screeching in her ear. She had met all the animals that live around her, and she loved them all. But she thought maybe there's one she hadn't met, for the girl had heard a story about a dragon. The tale goes that a young lady, not too far from her own age, went to a nearby pond to get a pail of water for the local church. It was eerily quiet at the pond, and when she approached the water's edge, she saw 2 yellow eyes glowing beneath the surface. The lady leapt back, and something launched itself out of the water to snatch her, but it missed. It was a giant serpent, with fangs like daggers, slimy scales of a deep oceanous grey, and eyes of malevolence. She ran back to the village, screaming. A group of men, armed with whatever weapons they could find, rushed over to the pond to slay the beast. Now, this is where the story varies. Some say that the monster was slain by the men. Others say that when the men arrived, there was no beast, and that the lady had lied. But which is it? This is what got the girl's mind whirring. Why 2 endings? It seemed too convenient to her that both versions ended with no monster, like a lie a parent would tell their child, and there were so many questions left unanswered. Say the men had slain the serpent. How? Where's the skeleton? And say there was no serpent, then why would the lady lie? What's the need to create a second ending? Unless you're trying to hide something. In case you couldn't tell, the girl used to be a nightmare to read stories to when she was little. She would have 1,000 questions after every page. But it's this inquisitive mind that makes her who she is, that gives her the courage to defiantly question what others compliantly accept as fact. So how do you find the answer to a question everyone has stopped asking? You look for it yourself. Now, where do you begin? hunting a dragon. Just like anything, the girl thought it best to trace the steps of the lady in the story. The old church still stands on the edge of the village, though it's seen better days, so the pond must be somewhere near there. If the pond was deep enough to hide an enormous serpent, surely there must still be something left of it. That was the girl's thinking. She looked through a book on the shelf in her small, rickety bedroom, with old, squeaky floorboards, which had a map of the village inside, and searched for any bodies of water. The landscape around the village was mostly woodland, and not much by way of ponds or lakes nearby. But she knew well the river that isn't more than a trench in the summer months, that ran at the foot of the hill by the church. Though it didn't match the description in the story, she had a good feeling about it. She packed her bag with the book, some water, and a sandwich. She wasn't going far, but you never know. She tied up her laces and walked out the door. She trekked through the woods, rolled over hills. It was peacefully quiet in the woods. A subtle breeze made the leaves gently shush above her. Squirrels and blackbirds rustling through dry leaves, and an occasional sparrow accented the song with their melodies, lulling the girl into tranquility. It was warm in the sun, where the light had found the gaps in the canopy. She would stop for a moment, almost forgetting what she was doing. Before setting off again. She had reached where the hill sloped down, and where the trees were sparse, where woodland blends into pasture. The church was round the corner from here, and the river below. The girl ran down the hill, where she glided a second longer, and each step thudded with a bit more force than usual. Halfway down, she realized running was a bad idea, but her momentum was too great to slow now. She thought she would lose what little control she still had if she tried. As the slope began to level out towards the bottom, she managed to slow herself down, thankfully. Before, she would have told you she was too grown up to enjoy running down a hill. But as she looked back up, gleefully and slightly out of breath, it was clear the little girl in her hadn't gone far. Calming herself from the excitement, she strolled towards the river, although it wasn't much of a river. With the recent warm sun, there was hardly enough water to wet the dirt, let alone hide a serpent. A little deflated, she looked around to see if there were any signs of a monster, but, of course, there wasn't anything. She wasn't really sure what she was expecting. but it seems there wasn't much of an adventure to chase after all. Disappointed, she sat beneath one of the nearby trees, the one that looked the comfiest, and got out the book in one last effort to find something on the map. The girl started to feel embarrassed. Maybe she was still just a child. Of course there isn't a dragon, she thought. She slumped her head back against the trunk of the tree in anguished defeat. The girl then realized she was sitting under a chestnut tree. She remembered when she would come here in autumn as a child, collecting conkers with her friends from school. It had been a while since she reminisced about her young school days. It all started flowing back to her. Like the time she went to school on a weekend to clear away the bramble and branches, to help make a garden around the little pond they had found in the thicket. No one could believe it had been there all those years, covered up like that without anyone knowing. She shot up. This was it. She knew that that pond definitely wasn't big enough, but maybe there's another one, buried in so much foliage that no one knows it's there. She scoured back through the map. She knows most of the woods pretty well, so that helped to narrow things down. There, on the other side of the river, and the nearby road that follows it, she found a huge patch of wood. She'd never been there before, had never heard anyone talk about it, and it was close to the church. There weren't even any paths drawn in. It had to be there, and if it wasn't, then she was prepared to accept that the story is just a story. But she had a new lead, and had to know for certain. She put the book back in her bag, took a big gulp of water, then marched towards the wood. She crossed the small stony bridge over the river, wondering for a moment if the young lady had crossed that same bridge, and entered through a parting in the bushes onto the road. There was a cobbled wall that ran alongside the road, and above it was a dense thicket. She knew that was where she had to go, but she couldn't see a way to get through. There was a part of the branchy barricade where the bottom was a little taller than the others, and there might just be enough room for her to crawl through. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option she had. She looked up and down the road to see if anyone was coming. She didn't want people thinking she was mad. They may well be right, but that was for her to find out. After all, there's a fine line between madness and genius. The girl climbed up the wall as quickly as she could, anxious about being seen, and shuffled her way through what could poorly be described as a tunnel. It was slow, incredibly slow, and painful, with the twigs and thorns whipping and scratching her, contemplating what on earth she was doing there. But eventually, she reached some larger trees, where there was at least enough space to sit. So she rested against a tree and started peeling off the vines that had clung to her. It was cold here. There couldn't be much light that gets through the matted branches. She noticed it was quiet. No leaves shushing, no squirrels or blackbirds rustling or sparrows singing. She was filled with dread and suddenly realized a flaw in her plan. Say she actually found a monster. Then what? She very carefully peered around to the other side of the tree, and there, coiled before her, a giant serpent with a head the size of a cabinet and scales of a deep, thunderous grey, like the sky before a storm. She leaned a little too far, and the beast opened one of its yellow eyes and glared into the girl's soul. In terror, she hid back behind the tree, much less efficiently and quickly as she would have liked. She had done it. She had locked eyes with a dragon. But for some reason, doubt started to fill her mind. Was it absolutely a dragon? Could she have been mistaken? She should have just left, but she tilted her head gently around the tree, the rest of her body firmly staying behind the trunk, to see the serpent, with its head now resting on the soil, staring at her with its piercing eyes. But they weren't brimming with malevolence. The girl saw something else in its eyes. Something was wrong. Be it bravery or stupidity, the girl didn't care. She felt the need and approached the serpent. She calmly crawled over to it and gently rested her hand on its snout. As she did so, it closed its eyes. Its scales weren't slimy, but smooth. There wasn't much of a pond either, more a boggy puddle. Mud plastered the underside of the serpent, and running along its back, moss grew down like a damp mane. She looked back down at the serpent's head beside her, and noticed it had been watching her. Softly, she was pulled into its watery eyes, like a whirlpool, and became lost in the deep sorrow that drowned its eyes. As she came to, she wiped away the tears she hadn't noticed had started rolling down the side of her nose. The dragon lifted its head and stretched towards the sky, finally displaying its magnificent size. "The world has changed," the dragon coughed. "Things aren't as they once were. The lakes are drying and the deserts are flooding. The earth has flipped on its head and everything is out of balance. Only time will tell. It looked down at the girl, deep into her eyes. There is a light in you. It's a light we all share, though I've not seen it in a human in a long time. Don't lose it. We must keep the balance. It looked back up to the sky. Perhaps there's hope yet. The dragon lowered its head again, closed its eyes, wriggled and contracted all down the length of its immeasurable spine. The girl shuffled back. It had looked so feeble before, but now expressed such enormous power with the subtlest of movements. And it vanished. Not a trace. The girl walked home as the sun set, grinning from ear to ear. Despite all impossibilities, she'd met a dragon. She hoped it found a better home. She hoped she could see it again. She didn't have a clue what the dragon was talking about. But perhaps one day she will understand.